move on to the prayer. Let us be still and remember the presence of God. As we commence our meeting, let us together pray for guidance and help. Almighty God, you are still blessing upon this council, direct and prosper our deliberations, to ensure for Australia and keep Yass healthy. Amen. Thank you. If I can move to apologies, there are no apologies. All councillors are in attendance. Declarations of pecuniary interest or special disclosures. Councillor Burgess.
12.1 change of income of possibly going to give money.
Okay. You're, okay, it's minutes of the meeting. Yep.
Madam Mayor, I would declare an interest in item 7.2, the old waterworks building. I'm president of Yass in a week, and so I'll leave the red, but it's non-pecuniary, but probably something.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I declare an interest in item 6.1 on the grounds that the St James's Church, which may consider to be a recipient, the warden of St James is my wife.
Significant
non-significant,
non-pecuniary, merely a matter of
certainly, thank you. Councillor Harker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have interest in 6.5. I'm related to the applicant. I will be leaving the room and not taking part in the vote.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Non-significant, non-pecuniary. I have a child in attendance at one of the schools which will benefit from the grants we must receive.
Which is the high school, is it?
And that's the sub-program grant tranche 3 in the directors. What's 7.9? 7.9.
7.9. Thank you. But you're not out. No problem. No further declarations. I'll move to the confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary council meeting on the 23rd of June 2021. So moved, Councillor Ferry, Councillor Turner second. All those in favour? Thank you, that's everyone. If we move on to the mayoral minute, there is no mayoral minute. At this point, we'll provide an update later in the meeting. Director of Planning Environment report. I'm just going to run through, there's 7 items. We'll just run through the 7. Heritage Grant Program. I should speak on that. Public Space Legacy Program. Councillor Jones. Bushfire Prone Land Map. Draft Victoria Park Master Plan. 6.5, we have someone who needs to leave. So we will go to 6.6, Development Application, Private Road, Parkwood, Wallaroo. I think there's an
alternative.
A slight variation to that, so we'll just leave that. 6.7, Development Application, High School Multipurpose Hall, 39 Grantham Street. Councillor Jones. Okay, if I could have a mover and seconder for 6.1, 6.3 and 6.4, please. So I move Councillor Ferry, seconded Councillor Reid. All those in favour? Thank you. Moving back to 6.2, Public Space Legacy Program. Councillor Jones.
Happy
to move.
Happy to move. I'd also like to
have a seconder. Councillor Frost, thank you.
Firstly, I'd like to congratulate our staff. We have a small but very efficient planning team, and it's through their success that this is possible. I wanted to check in to get a little bit of understanding of where our DA processing times is up to continue our qualification for this grant.
Oh. So the program actually finished on the 30th of June. So those processing times that are in the report are actually up until the end of the program.
So there's no way they can rip it.
They're auditing the information that's been submitted.
Okay.
And we got notification of that about 2 weeks ago. So we haven't had formal notification that we're successful, but we think on the basis of the times that we've submitted that we've definitely met all of the targets of the program.
Okay. So we've improved from what to what?
So we were sitting around, let's just say around 65 days at prior to the commencement of the program, and we were able to get down by the end of the program. We were at 24 days. So that's a gross median assessment time for a development application.
You tend to be congratulated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well done.
And that was just with one extra staff member added to the team, is that correct? Or?
That was one additional planner on contract, and then we had a building surveyor here for about 12 weeks, 3 days a week, assisting us as well.
Councillor McMahon.
Was much of that because of the fact we don't have to send out notifications to everyone as well?
You mean for exhibition?
Yeah.
No, all the notifications continued as normal in terms of the development application assessment. I think the difference was the
Not at
additional.
all what it used to be, though.
Yeah, it's a lot more. Yeah. It's dependent on council's community engagement strategy. Yeah. But I think the difference in the processing times was around the establishment of the fast track team in addition to the additional resources. So we've been able to dedicate pretty well 2 planners to do fast track assessment of all of the smaller sized development applications, just to allow them to get in and out as quickly as possible.
Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. That's everyone. Moving to 6.5, Councillor Harker, if you'd like to pop out. Thank you. We have a recommendation in front of us. Do I have a mover? Councillor Frost, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Reid, thank you. Does anyone wish to speak for or against it? Councillor Turner.
Yes, I'd like to speak against it, Madam Mayor. Preface any of my comments. Before I start, none of them are reflective of the hard work that's been put in by the staff in preparing this price. As far as I'm concerned, I voted against this when it first came up. The motion at that time was that it continue on its merry way, provided there was no significant objection. This language, unfortunately, is very precise. And if you want to take an interpretation that significant means that it has an impact, this is there was significant objection. We take it on volume, there were 10 to 1 against it. The ones who were for it, there wasn't a single one who was an unqualified support of this proposal. Every single one had a qualification. I believe if we adopt this motion, all that will happen is the proponent will throw more good money after bad. We're not here to determine whether a thing is financially viable or not. I would consider this as a totally financial lunacy. However, we do have a job in this chamber to look after our ratepayers. I'm concerned for the potentially 13,000 users of the Barton Highway on a daily basis having an at-grade entrance. I've seen what's happened at Yass Valley Way. I've seen what's happened at Jubion. I've seen what's happened at Burley Griffin Way. I've seen what's happened at Lachlan Valley Way. If you look out of the window today, 500 metres is reduced very, very quickly. And this proposal is putting B-doubles onto a road where the traffic is already impatient. The accidents that we have on the Barton Highway are predominantly due to impatience. This will compound all of the problems that we have. downwind curves were removed to make this one of the safest bits of road. And here we are proposing to allow the service centre to make it even more dangerous. It's a silly idea, and it should be cut off in its prime now. I don't want to see any of our ratepayers perish or have an accident as they do currently on Macintosh Circuit, which is similar. This is a Macintosh Circuit on steroids. And I would urge everyone else to vote next.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Jones.
Madam Mayor, this one is not an easy one. It wasn't easy the time prior when I did vote against it. I note that the commercial land has now, thanks to the Department of Education, being swallowed up in Murray Abatement itself, which does push this out of the area where we have prepared a commercial area for such. What does it do to the future planning of the area between Murray Abatement and Yass to have this jump the queue, as it were, if we allow it through the gate? What else can it bring through the gate? Can it bring through, example, the kind of things we see at the service centre up here in Yass in terms of fast food, multiple petrol stations? And what does it do to your future planning of that area, given that it's not identified in the strategic plan as yet for that?
So just start with around what uses will be there, the highway service centre. So the definition in the LEP includes the service station facilities, restaurant or cafe, takeaway food and drink premises, parking for vehicles and rest areas and public amenities. So potentially you will have that suite of uses on the site. In terms of the strategic planning for Murray Abatement, so in the report it does mention that there was a site identified in the Murray Abatement structure plan. It would be to the east of the Barton Highway, and that site, like that's just there in the structure plan. That's not, as far as I know, affected by any other development at this stage, but we do have the issue of the school purchasing the other land. The settlement strategy goes up to the boundary of the site. So essentially Hawthorn and then another large parcel of land have been identified in the settlement strategy, and then you move on to this particular block of land. So the piece to the south of Long Rail Gully Road is not part of the planning proposal, but the piece of land to the north is. So that's where the amendment applies to.
So through you, Madam Mayor, so the land directly abutting this proposed area is zoned what in the settlement strategy?
It'd be RU1, I would think. In the LEP,
yes,
at the moment, I'd say it'd be RU1. Yeah. And
in the settlement strategy for the future of that land.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
Yeah. So the land directly abutting it will be what?
It'll be, well, depending on the outcome of all the work that we're doing for Hawthorn at the moment. And I can only really speak for Hawthorn, but you're looking at some type of residential use. But the density and whatever will be determined as part of all this biodiversity work and whatever that we're doing. So essentially you will have residential development going up to the boundary.
Yep.
And then you have the site being private.
So there would be a service centre effectively at the end of the residential area, which is similar to what we have.
And that's identified in the report. It mentions that it will abut what will be the northern extent of Murray Abatement.
Is it worth putting the map up? My understanding is lot 1, 65797A would be wholly within the settlement strategy.
Yes.
And this would butt on to that.
So if you go to the first page of the report, there's a map.
Or the other block, that's not this block.
Yeah.
Is it separated by an old road reserve?
Yeah, there's a bit of road reserve there, and then you go straight into the site.
Yeah.
So that
It's on
The
the,
whole of that block
is the,
is inside the settlement strategy.
Correct.
Yep.
But that little block is outside and that one's outside. So the settlement strategy is only, pardon me, Madam Mayor, the settlement strategy is only a circle of it. Just a general area. It's not block and DP specific, is it? So that's right.
It's a general concept of where the growth should go, and it's the detailed constraints mapping that we do that determine the extent of that zone,
Right.
whether it goes right to that northern boundary or whether it actually comes up short. And that will depend on the constraints, flooding, biodiversity.
So it's very easy to include that in the whole study.
it's not.
It's not been identified to be included in the current work that we're doing. So we're not looking at this particular site at the moment.
The council would be mad if we were to rezone this now to not include it in that assessment, though, wouldn't we?
But
We're not doing it.
we're not rezoning, we're just having the additional use placed over the land, so it'll remain RU1, and then the additional use for high-rise service centre will be permissible.
So it's a bit like the service centre at Bounty. The land remains as its current zoning, which is rural, but there is a clause in the back of the LEP that adds the lot in the DP to say a DA may be lodged for a service centre on this lot and on this lot only. But in the sense of, let's say, if the settlement strategy work identifies the area of lot 1 to be the northern extent, it goes right up to the boundary, it will virtually abut this particular site, other than that separation of that road by that old road reserve.
Are there further questions, councillors?
I've finished my questions.
Yes.
I'll speak briefly.
Thank you, councillor.
Very torn. I mean, it's so close to an area where we could really plan for this properly. At this point in time, I'm against the project. I think Councillor Turner raises some very valid points. I've been driving this section with a view to this issue for quite some time, thinking about it. Although this is the Barton Highway that we're speaking about, it's through a very picturesque area of Yass Valley. And there's something to be said for interrupting the rural aspect of our community. I think where we have our current service centre before it adjoins the Hume Highway, it makes sense. This is an area where it doesn't make sense yet. Perhaps in the future, this is a location that we might come back and actually plan for. I think the proponents have done as much due diligence as they can. It's now up to us to do ours. I'm not convinced that we will be able to actually turn this Titanic around and make this not a site that B-doubles could enter. And I'm not confident that when it gets to that point that we'll be able to stop this and keep our community safe. I really appreciate the entrepreneurial view of the proponents. I think it was a safer location for the entrance of vehicles. We'd be having a very different conversation, and whether it was in our strategic area where we could get, I think, more clear advice about how this area will be used in the future, would be in a better position. But at this point in time, I can't vote for it.
Close off the voting, so we'll follow the conversation. Oh, sorry, Councillor Frost, my apologies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was just holding on.
Closing the vote, yes. Hang on, just before you close the vote, did you want to have another? Sorry, Councillor Frost, I apologise. It's hard to see everyone's face with all these things on.
Same as Councillor Jones, I've struggled with this thing. Hume Highway, every service centre is either on one side or the other side with a crossover via a bridge. But we can't consider that in this because that's up to the that's up to Roads and Maritime to manage that. The information we got from Roads and Maritime it pretends that a dual carriageway is not going to happen on the Barton Highway. They're strategically hidden behind the fact that there's not one there now. We haven't got anything written down, so there's not going to be one in. Whereas this room knows that there's going to be one, which would mean that we'd be automatically building a petrol station or service centre on one side of the highway with B doubles going across that highway, unless that's managed by RMS, and we can't consider that. We can't actually apply our minds to that, even though we have the knowledge that it's going to happen. When the Hume Highway was established, service centres were strategically placed between 80 and 100 kilometres apart. So you had Sutton Forest, 80 kilometres to Pheasant Nest, 80 kilometres to Maroon. Then they fudged it a bit when they did Goulburn bypass and they wanted Goulburn. But this room actually prevented Gunning getting one because it was too close to the Yass service centre and the Gunning service centre. So when Gunning Council proponent proposal at Gunning, this council and Goulburn Council argued against it because it was too close to the other two. And in this instance, there'll be a service centre at Yass, 17 kilometres to the next service centre, and then only 20 kilometres to the next service centre at Nichols at Canberra. But again, we can't actually apply that to our discussion because that's not our business, that's RMS's business. So the things that we can blatantly see, including the fact that every T intersection or every at-grade intersection, the ARMCO railing smashed permanently. You go out to Mundoon and to the turn off into Yass Valley, even though they were extending it, that ARMCO out there gets busted once a month. Cars, trucks, everyone trying to turn left at grade. Again, we can't consider that. We apply ourselves to this bill. All we can do is actually say, well, it's close enough to the ultimate goal of bar abatement. And if you were going to put a service centre, then maybe that's probably the best place because it's not in the middle of town, it's on the edge of town. Still don't know how I'm going to vote. Look on.
You talked yourself into it now.
Madam Mayor, this has happened all day long.
Yeah.
Because we know things and we know what's going to happen, but we're actually not allowed to apply those to our decision making in this because they're not our decisions, they're the decisions for RMS. The fact you're going to have B doubles crossing over that highway, they'll come in from Yass, they'll turn right across it, then they'll go back out and they'll turn right to go to Canberra on a highway that was on a piece of road which was put there because of the multiple deaths that occurred on that road.
And
the other day,
you might just add to that, but you're making an assumption B doubles will stop there. They may not.
The other day I mentioned the fact that there's at least 16 disused fuel stops whose tanks are either still buried and remain buried and haven't been cleaned up, and we go to Bowning and you've got two blights at Bowning, and Yass Valley Way you've got two blights, you've got Byron, you've got the old railway line, you've got 3 or 4. But we can't even impose an above ground tank condition on this development at this stage because it's not a DA, it's just an addendum to the purpose of the plan, which was rural lands, and we're going to say, well, you can have rural lands plus a fuel stop or a service centre. So I didn't get sufficient feedback from the staff on this one, and I say that the fact that we've got one so close to the other two, given that that's only an opinion, it's actually not actually written down solid guideline. The New South Wales Department doesn't say 80 kilometres on the Hume and 80 kilometres on the Pacific. wherever you feel it, like. So we're left in a quandary, you know what I mean?
If I may just, before you close, Councillor, I just asked the Director a question about, because it was raised the other day in broad discussion about an underground tank, and if everybody went electric in 15 years' time and fuel was no longer required, whether there was a requirement in the guidelines currently that they have to actually remediate that tank, and I'm going to let you answer that question.
So, firstly, any active fuel tanks, essentially service stations, they have to have monitoring equipment installed, and there's a regulation there that determines how it all works. So in terms of remediation, no, there is the fuel tanks can remain in situ until such time as someone wishes essentially to develop the land. Maybe you could investigate options for decommissioning of the fuel tanks.
But we can't do that now.
No. This is all considerations for
DA.
a development application. Yeah.
So you can deal with it at that time?
Yes, you would deal with, as much as you can, you would deal with these issues. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Sorry.
Just ask one question. Transport for New South Wales have come up with an absolutely brilliant suggestion in there that people should go on the Barton Highway and do a U-turn if they wanted to go to Canberra. How are they proposing to do that? They're going to do that at the Guardian turn off, or what are they going to do?
No, I don't think there's any advice around that. I think Transport for New South Wales are basically saying they have no objection, and they're making no guarantees around any form of access to and from the site. But they did mention a U-turn.
And their best suggestion is a U-turn.
Yeah, so potentially that would be something again.
PW doing a U-turn.
Yeah.
If there was to be a U-turn, it would probably be at an overpass situation, one of the interchanges, which is exactly what they did at Maroon.
Yes.
So that's what they did at Maroon with some of their operations up there. It's more likely that the Transport for New South Wales would say it would end up being a left in, left out only.
Which is the idea. Which means if you have one of those Aston Martins whose batteries are only good for 20 kilometres, charge up, drive down the Yass Valley Way, back up, I better stop and get a recharge.
That's right, that's
Question of staff, sorry, Manager. That we're dealing with one triangle. The other triangle is an identical situation in that it's surrounded by a road, by two roads on one side, and on the third side a disused road. This could come up again for that block of land, can't it?
Well, we have to come back to council.
So you can end up with two service centres or industrial blocks or something
Two
else.
service centres. You wouldn't end up with two. Anyway, that's speculation that you would end up with two service centres right side by side on a piece of road.
Certainly the example of generally on
Councillor Burgess.
I'd just like to say, I live away out that side. You can't get tractors into my abatement service place to get fuel. You can't get bloody trucks in there. You get little trucks in there. You can't get big trucks in there. Not big doubles. I just took the semi. And the people that's here with big doubles and on this end, not going to go way around there to come around to get fuel. They'll go straight out there and into my abatement and get fuel in this new service centre. That's the way I see it. I think it's a great thing to have there at my abatement.
Thank you. Councillor Frost, would you like to close? And does anyone else want to speak? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, could I just say, this is the discussion that I've heard so far, a lot of it focuses on stuff that's going to be dealt with in the DA. If there's a proposal goes further and there's a DA, that's where you discuss. That's where you discuss fuel. That's when you discuss the detail of access onto whatever highway happens to be there at the time. The moment we've done our best or say we haven't, the proponents have done their best to cover off on those things, and we've got our response from Transport New South Wales. But can I just start with the very first part, which is concern about the amount of dollars it's spending? Well, the proponent is willing to take risks on A, not getting access if there's a dual carriageway. They're taking risks on whether or not it's viable. They're taking the commercial risks about whether or not they're going to make money and so on. They're willing to do all that. It's not Yass Council doing this. Right? We're not proposing to put a service station there. They are proposing to put. We are saying yes, you may. And that's as much as our involvement is, and it's as much as it should be, because that's what makes the world go round. Well, is to have that sort of system. Concerns over road safety. Transport for New South Wales says that, well, basically doesn't raise any significant objections. If they had, they would. We're through these blocks, and if you think about it, this service centre, it actually opens onto Long Rail Gully Road, it's not actually onto the highway. And Long Rail Gully Road has just been cited by Transport for New South Wales, and they picked a site for it. I haven't said no with this, that makes it the wrong site or the wrong junction. I mean, they could have put it further down the hill or up the hill or however they want to do it, and they did it. They've picked the site. They've said it's okay. So why would we try and second guess what why would we try and second guess what their judgment is on this? It's not our job as councillors in here to go around and say, well, we think it might be unsafe when we've got a transport department focusing on making all of these things safe, and they haven't come back and said in strong terms, no, please don't do that. They haven't said that. They've said, we'll manage it. We might think U-turns are silly. They tried to do a silly thing with U-turns in Bookham, but they changed it. Right? But they manage it. That's their job. That's what they do. Not for us to second guess them and tell them they can't, and tell proponents they can't use their land for a productive purpose. The other point about road safety, and Councillor McManus quite rightly said, there was that 50 or 80 kilometre thing up and down the highway. Shortly after that, about 3 or 4 years ago, we started getting, not longer than that ago, probably 10 or 15 years ago, the Transport for New South Wales, or whatever they were called then, started looking at getting people doing driver of hire. They tried to encourage people off those highways to the villages, because when they did the planning, the 80 kilometres was too far apart, and they had road safety concerns with people who were falling asleep between them and not having good places to get off. So, their original advice and thought about planning for these things, they've thought better of it. They now encourage them to be a bit closer together. Makes sense. Similar thing if you look at the planning for petrol stations in Canberra, where when they initially put Canberra together, they put a service station in every suburban centre. When it came to the practicalities of it, they just about all went bust. We ended up with 3 or 4 places in Canberra where you can now get fuel, because this sort of planning and second guessing doesn't really work very well. You've actually got to leave it to the market to suss a lot of it out. And for us to put a layer over, as a local government, to put a layer over all of this and say, no, we think you should be a certain distance between them, that's crazy. That's not our job. It's not our job at all. Our job is simply to look at this and say, is there any really good reason why, from a planning perspective, this shouldn't be done? And there's a very good reason why it should be done. And that really good reason is a lot of the stuff that we really don't want to see in a village. The fast food outlets, the petrol stations, the big trucks, all of those sort of things. We don't want those sitting in Murrumbateman Village. If we don't provide an alternative, that's exactly where they'll go. And so the village character and flavour that we cherish, and I'm sure Councillor Reid values so much, is likely to be thrown out because we thought we were better at second guessing what the Department of Transport for New South Wales or Transport for New South Wales thought. That's crazy. Let's just give this our okay, let them get on with it. It may or may not occur, I would say, because I think, the risks are very high. But if they're willing to take a punt and keep going with it, so be it. Their problem, all those sort of things are their problem. And And from my point of view, as far as this council is concerned, we don't have a problem.
Thank you, Having closed the debate, I will actually put the recommendations as they stand in front of us. All those in favour? That's Councillor McManus, Councillor Furry, Councillor Frost, Reid, Burgess and Abbey. All those against? Councillor Turner, Councillor Jones. Thank you. You can invite Councillor Harker back. Thank you. So, recommendation carried. Move on to 6.6. I think there was there's a bit of a discussion, I believe, on a slight variation to the recommendation or to the conditions within the recommendation.
So it's just the conditions of the recommendation. So I've just taken out probably it's about 3 or 4 conditions, and just so they're not importing fill to build the road, and so we've removed the conditions that relate to that activity.
So moved, Councillor Ferry. Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? So one of the concerns of Councillor Reid was that that there was potential openness for fill. They've confirmed that will be removed from the conditions. Anyone else wish to speak for or against it? Okay, all those in favour? Thank you, that's everyone. Moving to 6.7, high school multi-purpose. James, I believe, wish to speak to that. 6.7 of high school.
Just multiple layers. Look, I'm very pleased to know this and to do that.
Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Harker. Oh,
everyone. I'd like to note that this building was identified after a fire back in, it was late 2011. And just as I was, our mayor's second run in council, and it was my first run in council, and it was one of the first things that happened during that term, is that our high school was left without major classrooms where they did their trade and computer rooms and you name it, they lost so much. The department came and did a master plan, and the master plan identified that that school community was in deficit of space, and it needed not only a 2-storey building to replace its trades and its classrooms that it lost, but it also needed a hall. Now, the Piccoli Education Department at that time said, no, we're not doing that. And this community had to fight so much to get what it has only just achieved recently, which is the new 2-storey building there, which we had to arm wrestle for, and it was 30% short of what it should have been according to the master plan. And a decade later, we're now seeing a DA go through for what this community should have received a decade ago. And I just want to point out how important it is for not only the people around this table, for every last day that we spend on this council, but the new council coming forward, to realise that while we are rates, roads and rubbish, primarily it's a whole bigger job. And I just want to acknowledge the hard work of our mayor at the time. I said, you get on the TV and say this and rally for this, and she did it. And we've got so much to be proud of for that school community. They have a new science building, they have a new tea building, multi-purpose for their trades, and now they're going to get a hall. And I really hope that the state government does what they said at the time, which is that it's going to be for community use as well. So I really hope that that comes to pass, because this community needs indoor basketball courts. It needs a space where Memorial Hall is really struggling right now, and a new building of that calibre will not only be a use to that school community, but also the wider community for decades to come.
Thank you. Anyone else for or against it? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. Great. I'm just going to run through the Director of Infrastructure and Assets reports, and we'll just note if you don't need. So the Yass water treatment upgrade project, we asked for a report to come out from Councillor Jones. Yep. Councillor Frost is out for 7.2. So lease of the Memorial Pool area and construction. Councillor Jones. Electric vehicle charging network, I think there was a variation to that one, so, yep. Craigaville precinct development application submission. Draft strategic Murrumbidgee and Reclams user group forum. Nope. Local roads and community infrastructure grants phase 3.
Yep.
Safer Roads Grant Program. Okay, 7.9, School Zones Infrastructure Sub-Grant Tranche 3. Councillor Jones. Yes, Floodplain Risk Management Plan and Study. Councillor Frost. There's so many others. Murrumbidgee and Barlong Book and Bounding Flood Studies. Got 3. Okay, can I have a mover and second for 7.6, 7.8 and 7.11? Thank you, Councillor Ferry. Thank you, Councillor Reid. All those in favour? Yes. Thank you. All right, back to 7.1. Councillor Jones, water treatment plant upgrade recommendations.
Yes.
Thank you.
Happy to move the recommendation.
Have a seconder, please. Councillor Turner, thank you.
Madam Mayor, I just want to congratulate the staff for directing us, in particular our General Manager, in directing us towards a peer review. Wow, what a revelation that we were on the right track.
Amazing.
I'd also like to say how pleasing it is to see that we're moving in a very agile way in terms of taking on the advice and getting the, make sure I get it right, so I don't embarrass myself, reverse osmosis as opposed to osmosis. That we're changing the plan to reflect the better way of going forward for our unique situation. May I say how disappointed I am that the Department of Planning and Infrastructure are not on board, and the community needs to know. We do not have the backing of the state government. We do not.
Can I just correct that it's not just the state government, it's actually a department, not the state government as a whole, just for clarification.
Okay. That's all. This is an opportunity for our local member to really come into bat for us. And I think all eyes should be on what she does next. And I would really appreciate the actions of Wendy Tuckman to really come on board with us. And that hard for Yass Valley. We were told during the election cycle when money was being splashed around, whatever it takes. And we have a department saying, sure, as long as it's only a couple of $1 million, which is what your stage 1 project is, and she'll be right. Well, it won't be right. We have an ageing water treatment works built in the 50s, given a lick of paint and a little bit of extra love in the 90s, and they expect it to survive not only this process, but for the foreseeable future, even though the needs of our community are almost going to double. And we have a growing population in Murrumbidgee and water has to come from somewhere, and we're committed to providing water to them. And we have some trenches up there with a bit of aluminium thrown in to coagulate it and some sandbags. And that's what it is, ladies and gentlemen, because there's nothing flash. There's nothing flash going on up there right now. And we committed to the extra tests of testing for Giardia when we had the issues of the boil water alert, just so that our community could be rest assured that we're doing all that we can to check. But the fact of the matter is, this water treatment plant is failing our community. It is not meeting the water guidelines. It's not. And no department can say to us it's good enough with what we're going to do. It's not going to meet those guidelines regardless of what we do in stage 1. And our community needs to know that so that we can all, as one, fight hard for this, because we have to get that generational change if we're going to grow Yass Valley if we're going to be happy with the water supply going forward.
If I may just add to that, we had our monthly meeting with the local state member, Wendy Tuckerman, on Monday morning and raised exactly that issue. She is as unhappy as we are in terms of the results from that department, and we are looking to escalate that around what we would call as the blockage, I'll use the term lightly, that we have encountered. And we're going to have further conversations, robust conversations, with her assistance to actually move this to a better place than currently where we're sitting. We, as Chris very clearly said at the meeting, the whole point of a peer review was that we would accept the outcomes of the peer review for better or for worse. And it turns out it's what we thought it would be. And unfortunately, they're not playing by the same rules, which was we will accept the adjudicator's outcome. So we will, and definitely go back into that. But certainly we have our local member concurs with the report and the adjudication that came back and doesn't understand the frustration we have. Well, she understands our frustration, but is quite frustrated with the department herself. So I just wanted to make that clear. She is definitely on board with this and wants it approved so that we can actually look at our sources of funding, which includes state and federal. We can't go after it anymore.
You promised.
The previous incumbent.
But you promised to take the what? To on the record. Just the bubble plumes, that's the aerator that's in the dam, isn't it?
Yes, that goes in the dam.
How satisfactorily do they work when they're a kilometre downriver? That's where one of them is at the moment.
So what's currently in the dam was not a bubble plume aerator. It was a mixer. It failed because of the.
But it's down near Flat Rock at the moment. It's working very well. It's not, it needs to be above the dam to operate, and it's down near Flat Rock. So
that's why we've gone to a bubble plume aerator.
Are we going to recover the one that's down near Flat Rock?
Do you know what was down there? We've recovered some, and they're sitting at the pumping station at the moment. I didn't realise there was one.
I'm sure.
It's not our first step towards our sculpture around the river project.
I'll see you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Well, that being the case, we have the recommendation in front of us. We have mover and seconder. All those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you for the hard work team. Jeff, I think you were popping out for this one. This is a report for noting. Do I have a mover and seconder for that? Councillor Burgess, Councillor Turner, thank you. Any questions, anybody? The sooner we fix it, the better. All those in favour? Thank you. Yes.
We're only fixing just.
Sorry. We'll take that one offline because we've already moved it. Sorry.
You haven't declared it.
I did. That's everyone. Would you like to ask your question, Councillor, anyway?
I want to know if we're fixing this up for the radio station to go back in, because
no,
that's a false hope that they appear to have. So they're not going, but this is not fixing up, it's to making safe only.
Yes.
And it's not with the radio station back.
We're working with the radio station at the moment, and we've offered a number of alternate locations for them. They're doing their own due diligence about each of those options, and they've indicated they will come back to us once they've completed that work. So no, this is not about fixing it up to put the station back in there. It's actually surplus to requirements. In fact, if we go ahead with the water treatment plant, it's probably going to go on in any case.
Okay, I've declared it all. That was everyone. So 7.3, lease of the Yass Memorial Pool for construction of a heated pool. Noting that it has to go out through the whole process of expressions of interest, which is the only legal way we can actually deal with this in a public manner. Councillor Jones, I think you wish to speak. Are you happy to move as well?
Yeah, happy to move.
Thank you. The seconder, Councillor Turner, sorry. Just speaking to it first, you can have a question.
Firstly, I'd just like to thank staff for the looking and chewing gum approach, so we can do this as quickly as possible. Noting that we're in, let me hold the glass and see. Noting that we're dealing with a commercial potential operator, and I think it's really important that if we're keen to go down this path, we do it quickly and we get out to the community as soon as possible to see what conditions we would like to see imposed if we were going to do a commercial commercial lease arrangement. I know a lot of people's concerns that have come up to me so far is, will it be affordable? Will we still be able to afford to go to our local pool? So the short answer is to that, it's up to council how we impose conditions on it and how we subsidise future arrangements, like we have done for, I imagine, the entire time that pool has been running. It's not like we're going to be a cutthroat operator and say, no, it must be, a standalone commercial operation from the very, moment this works. Without community consultation, this is something that we will always go back and talk to the community about, and I think that's really important that we communicate that this is still a community asset. The memorial pool is not being handed over in its entirety. It would be a lease arrangement, and we are still responsible for that, and particularly if it fails, which we have been given apparently a bit of a reprieve. We thought that we didn't have more than 10 years life without any further work done to it, but it's my understanding that there's still potentially $1 million worth of work that may arise within an unknown time frame. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay. So it's still a community asset. That's not something that leaves our portfolio of things that we need to look after.
Thank you. Councillor McManus.
Have we done any due diligence on the proponent? Or we just accepted the offer and said we're going to go to the market?
We haven't accepted.
No, we'll accept that there's an offer. We're going to go to the market before we actually done any investigation into the proponent.
So we had an offer from a company that runs multiple pools. But in any case, if we're going to an expression of interest, at that stage, when we receive expressions of interest, we would do a broader range of due diligence on any expressions of interest we get as proposal like before.
Like you would with a tender, you will do a background check on.
An expression of interest will be similar to a tender. It's just because we're going out to a lease, it's not a tender, it's an expression of interest.
So the ultimate outcome would be privatisation of the pool, wouldn't it? That would be the ultimate outcome, would be to privatise the public asset.
The operation.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the ownership of it.
No, it wouldn't be the ownership.
We can't privatise the ownership.
I expect there would be a right if it was the ownership. It's privatising the operation, just like you have done with the government's done with the assets.
And the question mark that will come back to us is whether it makes sense or not, and we get another look at it. But we can't discuss anything if we don't have information in front of us to discuss.
Hasn't been too many privatisations that have been successful for the consumer.
That's probably another conversation. Anyway, anybody else wish to speak for or against it? Okay, I will put the motion as it stands, which is to undertake further information. All those in favour? Thank you. All those against? Councillor McManus, noting against. Sorry. Okay, moving along to the charging network proposal. I believe there's a slight variation to the initial recommendation was there. Councillor Harper, would you like to speak to that one?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Hang on, we're going to take this. So, having visited both the sites over the week, and speaking to the community members, I think everyone was in support of the actual installation of these sites. You know, it fits with our sustainability model, it fits with our strategic pillars, but there was a lot of concern over the congestion of the sites, and that we were trying to put everything into two of the most densely used car parks in both Murrumbidgee and Yass. So reading through the proposal, and particularly the one from...
My apologies.
No, that's right. Thank you, Councillor. I'm reading through the proposal, actually on page 107. It actually, particularly the Murrumbidgee and actual proposal, they actually state that if this location is not suitable, they're happy to come back and have conversations with Yass Valley Council. So in this motion, what I'm actually asking is that we go and make sure that we've done all our due diligence about our master plans, about other sites, and check, appreciate they've said it's about amenities and the actual power supply, and just make sure that we haven't missed any other locations, because there are a lot of other locations that could possibly be more suitable long term and not sort of increase the congestion of those sites which are used constantly on a daily basis.
We have a seconder, Councillor Turner. Thank you. Councillor McManus.
The location 81 Main Street isn't the issue though, is it?
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah.
Because we lose the potential to lose six parking spots in that car park, which will bring the total to 8 because there's already an existing charging station there. I also think we need to bring it to the attention of the proponents that the flood plan we just adopted. These things will be 20 metres underwater, and I don't know whether so that doesn't upset them.
Cut out switch.
Yeah. The Main Street one doesn't concern me as much as the Murrumbidgee one, because Jones's Park is very congested, whereas the Main Street one is already existing NRMA. There's one attached to the Soldiers Club. The Jones's Park one, if there's a better location, I think we should exhaust that. And it will only take a month, but still give them time to get it in by Christmas.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Reid.
Yes,
Councillor Jones.
Yes, I'd like to support Councillor Harker and McManus have been saying. The Joneses Park area is very congested. The recreation grounds are not. And I do understand that part of the problem might be the electricity supply, but the recreation grounds is on an easement, so I'm pretty certain that shouldn't be an issue for us. I just think that putting the specific addresses in this motion, we should probably take the specific addresses out of the motion and then leave it up to council to take on board these issues and see if we can resolve them.
Yep. Through Madam Mayor, there are no locations in the motion that's before the one.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Jones.
Yeah, just quickly, very much support the motion. As one of the mums with multiple toddlers in the car, when you're trying to get a park to get to the current library, I've seen mums circling for Yeka drop-off because all of the Yeka ones are already taken. And it is just a lot of turnover, and I think that's the key. Whereas these car parks, they're suggesting park for a while and go off and do what you need to do, where the actual usage of these car parks can be 15 minutes in and out versus 2 hours stay and go to the local cafe. So it is a juggling act that we're going to have to look at in the future. And when we have some excellent car parks from a space point of view, like the Lee Street Park and Ride, if a conversation means you can have double what you want if you upgrade the power to that site, that's a win-win, which I'd love to see happen.
Terrific. Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak for Councillor Cross?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I support the motion because I think it's so much better than the original one. I wonder why council would be involved in this at all. The area down in Main Street was originally a community use area. It was actually the old refugee theatre. Was persuaded to be, that was moved, and the building is now in Murrumbidgee and it's serving well, but it was persuaded to be moved on the basis that we needed parking in that area. Now we're turning around and we're saying we're going to give it away. And for what? Because all we will do if we actually go with this stuff is we will delay the development of a private network of charging stations in Yass and in Murrumbidgee. We'll delay it because we will undercut anybody who was thinking about doing it on a private site, because they'll say, well, the council's already done that, and if they need more, they'll go and ask council again, because that's what just happened. We'll go and ask council again, and we'll end up as an electricity provider. It's not our job. And I mean, I constantly get told that I'm antediluvian, but that the EV vehicles are coming. So they may. But when they come, they're not going to stop because Yass Valley Council didn't give them a parking spot in the two most critical parking areas that we've got in the valley. And so I wonder why we're involved at all. It's not particularly sustainable. Anybody that, 80-something% of our electricity is generated from coal and gas. So the electricity that's going in there is not particularly green. It's not done
efficiency versus.
It's not as if it can be done at night when there's excess electricity and things like that. These are people who are coming in and need power now, so it's whatever happens to be at the time of the mix. So it's not particularly useful in a lot of ways. It feels like it's a nice green thing to do, but in truth, it's not particularly. And I think it will actually hinder the development of these things in the longer term in Yass Valley. So let's go back and see if we can find a different way, but let's do it in a way that encourages a private network that everybody can use and a sensible location in that way.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, Councillor Harkin. Yes.
Thank you, fellow councillors, for your comments. I think, as we expressed, the main issue is these extremely congested car parks, and as Councillor Jones mentioned, particularly the one in Main Street, you do circle round and round and round trying to get a car park in there right now, and I think the community will be frustrated that we further congest that car park, and it would be remiss of us not to look at alternative options. As Councillor Reid also mentioned, there's potential to look at different park and ride options for Murrumbidgee as part of our master plan. So before we initiate something like this, there is potential to look at a bigger strategy and know about that. And also in terms of Councillor Frost's comment, some have taken initiatives, such as Shaw Winery, to actually put in. I think he has 3 or 4 already that he's already put in. So there is some form of private market out there as well. So I suppose the motion is just ensuring that we take a little bit more time to make sure we've really explored this as a council and to see if there are any other alternative locations where we can support these companies to put in their charging stations.
Thank you, Councillor. All those in favour? That's everyone. Thank you. If we can move to 7.5, Craig Mill Precinct. Wanting to move it to concept design. Moving to a DA potentially. Councillor Jones.
Madam Mayor, if I could move the recommendation.
Can I have a seconder? This stage. Councillor Reid, thank you.
Madam Mayor, fellow councillors, everyone that I've talked to who's had an objection to us moving forward with this, who participated in the community consultation process, has done a complete 360 and has said wonderful things about the project and wonderful things about our staff conducting the community consultation. And I just want to congratulate particularly our infrastructure department led by James Dugdale, who have been very agile in dealing with the submissions, particularly those regarding the parents' rooms, and has sat down at the 11th hour with the architects to make it happen so that we can actually get that incorporated into the DA going forward. I just want to say a big thank you from the bottom of my heart from all the families out there for the next 50 years who are going to use these facilities and are going to know it's kid-friendly in Yass. Go there, enjoy the library. If you've got to drop into, the administration building, there's a great cafe and it's got a parents' room next to it. You're going to love it. That's what they're going to say about Yass Valley, because decisions being made tonight going forward with this DA are there for the community to see and eventually for the community to enjoy. So well done.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak for or against it? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I've got a question, really. I'll start with a question, but I think I might know what the answer is. What's proposed? We've done some, gone out to the public as a whole with the very generalised plan on this is where the library goes, this is where and that's all. The development of a DA is a step further, and we're sort of two people in the sense that if this comes through as a DA, what further consultation are we going to do in terms of the detail of what goes into the building before we actually submit the DA? That's my question.
Before we submit the DA, we weren't going to go to any further consultation because the DA is submitted based on the concept designs, and we've made a couple of amendments. There will be consultation as part of the DA process. We have to release this to public consultation again as part of the DA process. Sorry. And so that'll get to DA. If the council so chooses to go into detailed design, we will then go to another round of public consultation. In fact, more detailed consultation based on specific parts of the precinct as part of the detailed design as well before we get to there.
So just a question, I'm just clear what the DA is actually going to include. Will it include, for example, the detail of where the rooms will be within the library? And
yes, it will.
It will. As I understand, that particular information hasn't gone to the general public, it's gone to some members of the public. People who had
it's gone out to the general public in multiple different ways.
Yeah, but as a public release.
Yes. Yep.
We've been certainly talking to a range of people who've made submissions or attended the drop-in forums and the like, and made it very clear what plans we're talking about, which is included what's inside the buildings, not just the external components of the buildings.
Okay. That was my concern. My concern was that we were sort of leading it to the DA process to do some of that. And then we come across the thing, well, that's not a planning concern, sort of.
As Councillor Jones,
and that's not what we want to do. And so you're satisfied that basically anybody in the area who wants to have seen it will have seen it. Not just because they made a submission to the early one, but it's been.
Yes, it's been released in multiple different ways to multiple different groups, as well as made publicly available on the council's website. It's been displayed in the library for people to come and see. It's been available here for people to come and see as well.
That's good. There's no reason why we won't leave those drawings up on the website so people can continue to look at those plans. So when we put the DA in, we'll take them down and we'll rely on the DA plans at that stage.
So at the moment, if people see something that they think is really important, they can certainly put that view to not perhaps to this room, but certainly put it to council staff so that. So you really encourage people to do that. I would until the DA's actually submitted at least.
So we're also in the process of making a separate web page for it, which will have all the information, including the latest updates of the concept designs as we go through. And there's always the council submission page to put submissions in. As you can see, I've collected a whole range of submissions over a whole range of different topics in order to include there so different people can see it. I have been meaning to get the video from the public consultation up because, as Councillor Jones pointed out, anyone who listens to Andrew speak gets a really good feel for what the building is. We've just discovered that it's a large file because it was a 2-hour consultation. So we're working through getting that up onto the website.
Does anyone else wish to speak for or against it? It's Councillor McManus.
I noticed in there that there's a comment linking of the rail line. Didn't we purchase that?
There is, yes, we do own the area from Crago Street that runs through the Aldi car park. There's an access carriageway easement over that land in favour of our site. Sorry, in favour of Aldi's.
But we own it.
We own it. So part of the Aldi's car park and access is on our land.
Yes.
as part of that design. So that's still part of it. And so the link is more about a pedestrian link. It's not necessarily there to introduce rolling stock back onto the rail line.
No, it says request the best use of railway. That was a privatised railway line.
The layout from Cravo Street all the way back up to Yass Junction is what we've asked for them to vest into council as part of a grander plan in terms of a pedestrian cycle link.
But this side of Cravo.
No, it's ours. Yes, that's ours.
Any further questions? Okay, all those in favour? Thank you, that's everyone. Moving to 7.7, local roads and community infrastructure grants, phase 3. Councillor Jones, I think I have down here.
Madam Mayor, I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Have a seconder. Councillor Turner, thank you.
The only concern that I wanted to check in on regarding this was this is obviously an opportunity to not only set us up for the future year of resheeting, but it's also an opportunity for us to set aside funds for the work that we anticipate is coming, which will be needed for Memorial Hall, which at the last opportunity to do this, we put 100% onto roads. And the community kickback was pretty instantaneous because everyone knows out there Memorial Hall's not in good shape. Now it is coming up to its anniversary, and I just wanted to check, is the way that we're allocating the funds, does that make it accessible to get the work done that we know is coming? Because I understand that we've got a report that's due next month. So I just want to make sure we've got it available when we need it in order to get the work done prior to its.
The last paragraph of the bill basically says $1 million gets assigned to, has already been assigned to RAS, and then we've got some in reserve.
The funding is not available for expenditure until January next year. So we can't spend it at the back end of this year. So we have to wait until January next year to spend it. That's the challenge with this funding. The reason I'm asking for this now is so that we can plan for the resheeting, because I need to get onto that, planning this far out to be able to get enough resources and stuff to do it.
When it stops raining.
When it stops raining, yes. The remaining, as we said, once we get the Memorial Hall plan, we may have other issues we need to deal with, which is why I'm suggesting not to put the remainder against roads, because we have other things that need addressing.
Thank you. Just want to make sure that we weren't locking it down.
Councillor Berry.
Madam Mayor, can I just clarify the comment by the previous councillor on kickback from the community? I've had multiple residents come back to me very loud and clear and actually state that $1 million for gravel resheeting is actually quite encouraging, including just as recently as last night. So I agree with the sentiment of the councillor, but I just wanted to note that the community that I've spoken to are in pretty loud support for that $1 million.
Councillor Harker.
Thank you. I still wanted to agree with that. We're all getting multiple calls about the roads, given this extremely wet year. I suppose my question was, that's not going to be accessed till 2022, as you said, next year. Is there the option to apply for emergency resheeting funding? Because current budget we have and the unexpected damage, I'm assuming there may be options to actually apply to get additional funding outside of what's already in our budget.
I'll investigate that. I don't know.
It's more than likely, if we get declared as a natural disaster, if the rain is the extent so it creates a natural disaster, we qualify for funding for that work. That's how we did it in the past. If we're not declared as a natural disaster, the funding is very, very good.
Maybe next week.
Maybe next week.
But just a question to noting with the director that we actually have put additional funding in this financial year already, over and above what we would normally have done. We have added extra when and if the grader drivers are actually able, without the water trucks, because they won't need them, to actually get back on our roads. And I guess the comment is that we have to just encourage, I know there's lots of complaints, we have to encourage people to drive to the conditions, and unfortunately the conditions are lots of potholes, including in asphalt roads. Okay, all those in favour? Thank you, that's everyone. Moving along to 7.9, school zone infrastructures, sub-program grant tranche 3. Yes, Councillor Jones.
I'm so excited to move this motion.
Seconder, please. Oh, lots of hands everywhere. Oh, good. Councillor Harker, I got the.
5 years ago, I became the chair of the local traffic committee, and I was so interested in this particular area. I actually went and sat in on this committee multiple times during my first term of council, and was just aghast at how many issues our community was bringing forward, and RMS were just dismissing as not an opportunity for a grant. We have a road safety officer. Her name is Meryl, and I'm almost about to get T-shirts saying I love Meryl at the moment. The success that she's had in getting these grants has to be recognised, and I want to tell you why. Because I think it was 2.5 years into my chairmanship of this committee, we were notified that TF New South Wales had pulled their department which provided us with a safety around schools officer, and that was the only way that we could access grants to get actual things done around our schools. And so the game became a lot harder for our staff almost immediately to find out how we could possibly fund all of the things that our community was bringing to us. And so I just want to acknowledge the work that has gone on behind the scenes. It's one thing for members of that committee to say it's got to be done. It's another thing to actually make it happen, and that's what our staff have done. And part of the issue of the Yass Public School, that's $500,000 towards that project that has existed since I've been on council, and no doubt many years prior to that. That is a situation that's only going to get worse as they increase the number of students in that catchment, particularly with the new development that we've approved to go forward there, Yarra. And so to see real dollars go towards a real fix for that school is so pleasing. And the school principal never gave up in terms of her advocacy, also the parents' advocacy from Beck Duncan, and also Cold Target from bus drivers. They all never gave up on the issue. They always came forward and told us when they've had a near miss. We tried every which way to try and solve that. It was never going to be solved without real money, real dollars going towards fixing it, and now we've got it. And I just want to say a big thank you to staff for what they've done. Well done.
Thank you. So we have mover and seconder. Anybody else wish to speak to it? Be nice to see a long-term solution eventually come around for these schools. So all those in favour? Thank you, that's everyone. Moving to 7.10, Yass Floodplain Risk Management Study Plan. Councillor Foster, yes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, could I just say a few words and then I have a question?
Do you want to move it though?
I'm very happy to move it.
Thank you.
Well, yes, I will, but I may call for an amendment depending on the answer to the question.
Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Turner.
Okay. Thank you. Madam Mayor, could I congratulate staff on the consultation on this one? It's not they did a lot of work, but also the consultation that went out to committee I thought was excellent, and yeah, it's been a really good job. Can I also thank staff for pulling out that Brown Street issue, because I think treating that separately is a good idea, and that's a good result. I am, and also for the work that staff did, I know, in trying to get a better risk management approach to this than was originally proposed in the first drafts of the report. I still think it's still rather risk averse, but rather too risk averse, but it's a lot better result than what we had before. So thanks staff for that. In general, I think that staff has done an excellent job. Could I ask a question perhaps now, and it relates to the Apex Homes area, and in particular the corner block on the corner between Meehan Street and Church Street, which is on the high side. There's a block there of that whole complex which they are looking to redevelop. And my concern is that if we pass this, they will be unable to redevelop be unable to redevelop that block. And to me, that would be a pity. The report says, well, that'll be an area that would go underwater 1 in 100 years, and therefore plus 1 in 100 and whatever number of years it would be. And therefore we shouldn't be putting aged care units there. But given that it is a complex and the viability of those aged care units, I suspect in the long term relies on all of that area being used. I'd just like an answer to that question before we tick it this month, and before we found a way through that may allow the Apex Homes to finish their development. It's essential to finishing the development of the complex.
Okay, so first I've got a note here that I need to give you the specific advice relating to Apex. So I'll just give some very general advice at this stage, is that they are able to lodge their development application, and this particular set of planning controls will apply to that property. So I think the issue is probably most likely going to be around the PMF levels. So the plan now only requires certain critical uses to be built at a level that's equivalent to the PMF. And so that is health services facilities, electricity generating works and emergency services facilities. That's in relation to mainstream flooding. In relation to major overland flooding, critical and sensitive uses, which I think they would fall into the category of the sensitive uses, they would need to build to the PMF, but in relation to overland flooding. So the advice of the engineers is that is not as significant in terms of imposition on development because of the actual depth of the flooding would occur from the overflow flooding. So I don't want to give specific advice around Apex because I need to look at the site, we need to look at the levels, and I need to go through the risk plan to be able to give the specific advice. So I'm really only prepared to give some very general advice about how I think this might apply.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's not preventing them from lodging a DA. They can still lodge a DA, and we've just got to do that detailed assessment.
Yeah.
But as part of the DA process, we have pre-lodgement meetings with people.
Yeah. I'm wondering whether it would be in their interests and in our interests to defer this a month so that they can perhaps do some pre-lodgement conversations with staff before we actually apply this. That's my concern. My concern is that for this, that if we do this now, then and there's a DA lodged, then we're obliged, I would imagine, to use the rules that are applied in this. I'm gathering that there may not be a problem if there's overland flooding because it's a very high area on a very steep slope, so with a lot above it. So that's my concern, I guess, is that
I understand the concern.
My concern is that we might, for the sake of a month or whatever, do this.
I would have to say, if I may just interrupt, Director, that we can't put it off for one group. It's showing a sort of lack of clarity on our part, and I would have to say that the whole point of a pre-planning meeting process is not to stop the development, is to how to help them get it approved, and that's actually what the staff usually do. They will have to have a plan of management in an evacuation in a 1 in 100 year flood situation, which is the same for everybody else who would be putting in a DA. So I couldn't see this slowing it down putting this in place and holding it for a month, they may not be ready to go. So why don't we just keep putting it off for months?
The other problem,
Yeah, I don't think
Well,
we
they
can do
can
that.
lodge a DA. That's-
the other problem you have is that you can't ignore what you know.
No.
And you've got this information now. So even though it might not be finalised or adopted, when a DA comes in, you're still going to have regard to the issue of impacts of flooding.
Because it's a public document.
It would be really improper for us to put this on the back, in the back corner, so we could get it in.
Yeah.
Which is effectively what we're doing. Is there any money left? From all this studies and, just one of the comments I did get, I don't get a lot of comments on council matters, but it would be great to have a permanent marker somewhere down the river of different flood levels. This talks about promoting and talks about keeping community informed, increase public awareness of the risk of flooding in the community. It would be great to have a marker, even with some of the photos that were available down near the river, so people could actually see what the 1870 level was, what the 1953 level was, and what a
Sounds like a mainstream.
and what a 5% or a 10% like.
Sounds sexier than the masking tape.
If there's money there, I just think there's an opportunity to actually fulfill the requirement of the flood plan, which was to promote, as actually said, talks about increased public awareness of the risk of floods in the community. That would probably do more than anything else, and will make people aware of exactly where the flood levels could actually get.
So your question is actually that, is there real money available? So I guess we'll back to the stuff.
If there's not money, I think it would be a good little project to put in the next year's budget to actually put a marker on the river so that people near the river, so people see where the flood levels.
Through there, I think if there's money left over in the project budget, we would need to seek permission from the funding provider to do that as a consequence of this. And
But if it fills one of the obligations,
that's exactly right. But if we can't get that money or that saving, if there is one, to reallocate it, then yes, it would be a project for a future budget consideration, yes.
that's why I started with the question. That's why I started with the question: is there money? If there's not, we put it into the forecast. So can you take that down on things to do, Chris? Others to do, because I want to do it.
It's actually doing that right now.
That's the plan.
Well, the top of the main street is
Councillor Turner.
it's too far.
Sorry, Councillor Turner. Councillor Turner, take.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but we're about to spend 1.7 million down there on the playground. I would suggest a totem pole in the playground would be more than capped.
I think we'll take that. Very good suggestion, Councillor
And
Turner.
on the top of the slippery dip, far underwater.
Excellent recommendation. All right, come on, councillors. Right, so we had a mover and seconder. Yes, we did. Thank you. Any other conversations, comments? No? All those in favour? Thank you. That's everyone. So, and remiss of me to welcome Lynette, our new Director of Corporate and Community. For those who hadn't met, I've seen you several times, so I've assumed that everybody has already met. So I do apologise for not introducing you earlier, who's moved to us from Oberon, so she's not worried about the cold here. She's settling in and in process of full-time accommodation, hunting and settling. Anyway, I just wanted to welcome you to the team and on board to the council. And the councils will make themselves known to you if you haven't met them already after the meeting. So thank you very much, ladies.
There's accommodation available at Cuda.
So I'm just going to run through. There's 5 reports here. Investment and borrowings report. Any comments? No. Rates arrears. Councillor Frost. Revotes. Councillor Frost. Restricted assets policy. Councillor Jones. Don't know why I did this. Service New South Wales Partnership Agreement. Okay, well, can I have a mover and seconder for 8.1 investment and borrowing report? Thank you, Councillor Berry. Councillor Reid, thank you. All in favour? Thank you. Moving to 8.2, rates arrears. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm a little bit confused by a couple of figures here. The director might be able to guide me through them. When we look at the table provided of summary of prior year's outstanding balances at 30th of June, we end up with a total in it all tallied up of $474,301.11. But when we look at the balance outstanding in the next table, which is rates and charges levied and payments made, it says there's a balance outstanding at that same day of $843,120.91. So there's $300,000 or $400,000 different. What's the explanation for the two figures? I don't think anything's wrong. I just don't understand the relationship.
The table 2 is a summary of specific outstanding rates identified. The balance on table 3 is all rates, so it includes residential, non-residential, etc. So there's two different. They're looking at two different things. Table 2 is giving you like private or proposed private. For example, the proposed private cemetery in Middle Crown Land. They're specific items. They're not just general rates. So the difference is just the general rates gap, whether it be residential, rural, etc. So that's why. So there's about 400,000, not quite that much, of residential or rural rates that weren't paid. On
So
top
this is
of
prior year, and then the next table is actually payments 1 July to 30th of June in this year. Is that correct?
They're both in the same financial year. Right. They're just different. They haven't compared apples with apples. They've given you half of the story in table 2, and then they've just haven't explained the other half.
So the other half are actually rates from the current year. So it would have been from
1st of July 1920.
1920 year. But so what's the figure just above that 400,000 of 273 that is against 1920? Because I think that's what that figure was.
1920, 273.
So these are 208
That's the outstanding rates.
I have to take it on note and discuss it with the staff.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Okay, I'll quite happy to remove this one.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. Moved, seconded. Councillor Perry, thank you. If I might just ask, 18, 19, 19, 20, the others all have a little bit of an explanation, so if you wouldn't take that on notice for the next update, that we just have a little tad more information, because this is, usually it relates to either properties or problems with debt recovery, other things, and it may relate partly in some form to COVID and people needing to have time. I just think it's helpful to have it explained in here, as we have done with the others.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All those in favour? That's everyone, thank you. Moving to revotes from 2021 to 21-22. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Quite happy to move this one.
Seconder, thank you. Councillor Turner, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I note that staff assured me that there was nothing not related in the sense of the main project that has been not put in here, so it actually terminates even though it was unfinished. So that's good news for me. Could I just ask a question? It's probably the Director of Engineering. The resheeting here that's not done and has been revoting to go forward, will that be done on a priority basis? So will these ones be done? Are they be the next resheeting projects to be completed, or will you restructure or rethink?
So the resheeting that's in here. So the resheeting that was in here, we voted in earlier this year. We started that in June. So, and the reason it's been revoted is because it was always planned to be done in the second half of the year. And that's been done. So we have been doing that on a priority list of roads that are well used and need work. So it's actually more been need work than well used, because some of them have been in pretty bad condition and needed the work. So we're continuing to prioritise the work as we go.
Yeah, no, that's good. So, but if there is ones in the resheeting that aren't here that are in the current budget, I think there's no problem there, or there's not much of it. Will they? Is it possible they will be done before these ones, or the ones that are here?
These were the ones that we've already planned.
And so they will continue.
There's no additional roads added with this. These are the ones that were planned and approved. I think it was the March council meeting we approved that order. So they're the ones that we planned and approved.
So the next tranche
starting in January.
No.
So we haven't decided on those roads yet. Now we have that. This is why I need the approval to go ahead and do that. I can now task the roads delivery team. They'll go out and inspect the roads and prioritise the next tranche of roads to be done for that extra million.
But you expect these ones to be done first?
Those ones will be done first because they're all due to be finished by the end of this year. If we can get enough dry weather to allow us to compact the roads enough to build them.
You won't start.
Okay. Thank you, councillors. Is there any other questions? All those in favour? Thank you. Moving to restricted assets policy. Councillor Jones, I believe.
Yeah. First I have a question. Actually, I've got a couple of questions. But the first one is, what changed? Or was this a review, nothing changed, and we're just adopting our original policy? Because normally when there are changes, we see the two side by side. And it only dawned on me after our Monday meeting. I did ask the question, what changed? So.
Yeah, look, I can't specifically point to what the changes were, other than that the main focus coming out of the previous audits and the like was making sure that we listed the externally and internally restricted reserves, and we were clearer about the purpose of those reserves. So that was probably the main adjustment that's been made, and obviously. If there are further reserves that need to be created in the future, then we would need to adjust the policy to reflect that and be very clear about what the purposes of those reserves are.
So noting that we have a reserve that seems to have been logged in with infrastructure, so the Southern Phone Reserve, we have a resolution that said that we would go to community consultation before we spent it. Now, through no fault of staff, while it is a restricted reserve, it doesn't mean it can't be accessed for infrastructure if we sit it with infrastructure, and so it has. So as an amount of 800 is now at 400, but we haven't consulted with the community, even though we may have gone out to consultation on individual projects. We haven't realised that we're dipping into that particular bucket of money. So do we need to pull that out now and put it as a particular reserve so that it sits alone, or do we? Will it be protected under the current mechanisms that we have in this policy? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
That's true, Madam Mayor. The intention of that Southern Phone money in particular was to go into renewing or new assets. That was what it was intended for. With all the grant money that we've received in the last while, we've been using that reserve to provide the matching grants, and that's why so we've done it without explicitly making reference to that previous resolution. And so I don't think you need to.
Does the one we're adopting? Will we continue to see the degradation of that bucket, or without it coming back to us to consult with the community specifically, or do we need to set it up by itself?
I've suggested, following on from the discussions the other day, that a further report come back to the next council meeting to explain the situation in terms of the status of that particular reserve and that money, and then about what we do going forward in terms of of dealing with that money and meeting the intent of that original resolution. So the idea would be, this is just adopting the framework.
Yeah.
The next report is more about the status of the money and how we're going to manage that going forward.
Okay, no, that's great. My next question is, would it be prudent to have the balances of the actual reserves come up in our quarterly report as it's listed here in these sections, or are we seeing that anyway?
We will. The intention is for the next report is, once we've got it finalised, because the information I circulated the other day hadn't been checked. That was just a quick cut that we did for the purposes of the discussion. Is to provide that as part of a regular future report, is about the status of your reserves.
Right.
So that will be part of the report coming up in February, and then we can actually then work out, okay, do you want that every quarter, every 6 months, or just annually?
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
I don't think there's any need to have moved and seconded, Councillor Turner. I don't think there's any need to add further report back.
No, it's coming. Yeah, it's coming. I just wanted to understand whether, sorry, excuse me, whether this policy will work with what we want to do, and just so that we'll be seen, or whether it just will be subject to the same kind of vulnerability. And I just didn't understand whether this policy reflects our discussions that we had on Monday and will do the job, because it's happened while this policy has been running, and I didn't know if these changes stop that, or we need to do more. Yeah.
So it's moved by Councillor Jones, seconded by Councillor Turner. Any other questions, councillors? Okay. All those in favour? Thank you. That's everyone. Moving to Service New South Wales Partnership Agreement. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I'd just like a little bit of an explanation of what this thing does. I have to say, I look at it and think it really just said we're going to be nice to one another. My concern is that Service for New South Wales has an office up the other end of town, and you can find it very easily, because it's where the queue of people stand outside waiting to get their regos done or anything done, and almost on any day there's a queue of 4 or 5 people standing outside. And I'm looking at this and thinking, how does this help that queue? And I'm thinking, maybe not very much. And then I'm thinking, instead of doing an agreement which I cannot see the benefit of, maybe they'd be better off putting an extra person on duty out there. But what does this actually do that's going to take us forward, that obviously took somebody a long time to put together?
So we currently have a disagreement with Service New South Wales, and it has nothing to do with the office down the road. This is to a program that the Service New South Wales in the head office for small businesses, and this agreement has actually benefited quite a few small businesses being able to identify and obtain small grants. I don't have the list of those with me, but I've been advised by staff that it has been very beneficial for quite a few small businesses, and hence why we're renewing it again. So it's not to do with, renewing your regos and going to Service New South Wales Centre itself. They have expertise staff who actually assist small businesses to obtain funding.
They also contact us.
Yes.
Yes, a small business with planning inquiries.
So that's fine, but why do they need us, and how are we going to relate?
We regulate a lot of the approval activities for small businesses to become established. So really what it is, it's that while they might look after funding for small business, we're the ones that regulate the development activities. So it's about working in partnership with them. They might get the inquiry for somebody to establish a small business, and as part of that handover, if you like, to council, is that they can provide some basic information to direct them to come to council and give us a heads up about those inquiries. So it's about working in concert with each other. They're more about the funding, we're more about regulating the actual development works.
It's actually just providing an additional service to our small businesses. So can't see where that's a huge problem. Moved by Councillor Turner, I think, in the end, because you had a question, unless you want to move it.
I'm seconding you.
Sorry, you were asking a question, but you hadn't moved it, and Councillor Turner waved and moved it. Councillor McManus is seconding. Thank you. Any other questions, anyone? All those in favour? Thank you. Moving to the General Manager's report, and his first one is possibly been outdated. Null and void. Null and void.
This is what happened when you write the reports in advance of the announcements.
Yes.
I've just put a suggestion that you simply noted, and it's, you need to make a decision probably closer to the next election date that's been scheduled. There is actually a forum tomorrow that I've circulated the link for that through, and you can register and you can find out all about how they're going to manage an election in the run up to Christmas. But it does create some interesting challenges for us, mainly because the polls look as though they will be declared on the 23rd of December, and then there's only a certain number of days that you need to then have your election for mayor and deputy mayor, which is going to be a bit of a challenge over what is traditionally a shutdown for us, as well as a holiday period for most people in the community. So it's going to present some challenges, and I'll certainly be interested. I'll be listening into the webinar tomorrow, because I'm certainly interested in how they're going to manage all of those things and what arrangements they're going to be put in place for the administration of the organisation to continue. Our biggest problem is, of course, we won't have a mayor from the 4th of December until that first meeting. So we need to be able to function as an organisation. And one of the suggestions has been made that perhaps some of the mayoral delegations get delegated to the general manager to keep the place running up until that first meeting.
Well, I might just add, if I may, before we go to that, is that there has been a request put through to the Office of Local Government to consider the mayor staying in place as a figurehead, as they are with a popularly elected mayor, who actually stays in place till there's a new mayor elected.
Past the declaration.
Yes. They used to have it in there so that there was somebody there in case of an emergency, for example, fires, bushfires, floods. For some reason, in their amendments to it back in 2016, they slipped through and forgot to include it. So they're going to apparently reconsider that item.
I would move the recommendation to enable discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Ferry, seconded. Thank you.
Question.
Hang on, Councillor McManus and Councillor Jones.
So that caretaker provision isn't there at all.
The caretaker provision will now, based on the rescheduled election, is the 4th of November. Is the caretaker, that will be the caretaker period, which is always 4 weeks up until the election date.
Wasn't the mayor caretaker till the next election, the next
It
mayor?
used to be, but not anymore.
So that's the provision you say that's gone.
It's gone.
So the other councillors will relieve their duties on
The 4th?
On the 4th of December.
December, correct.
Election day.
Yes. The reality is that all councils, including the mayor, term finishes on the 4th of December. There is then a vacuum of no elected leaders in place up until the elections, results are declared, and the council then appoints its first, its mayor and deputy mayor.
So can we declare that the meeting of the 23rd of December goes ahead for the election of the mayor?
No, because
the name of the 9 will be.
Yeah, but you won't have been able to give due notice on that day of a
That's what I'm saying. Can we do it?
No.
Can we give due notice now to say that there will be a vote for the new mayor on the 23rd of December?
Can I strongly suggest that we have that discussion much closer to this when we have some idea what's going on?
We need to find out some more, because one of the things that we've said is that it would be better to have the old system whereby the mayor carried through, and that would make life a hell of a lot simpler. So we've sort of already raised that. This forum tomorrow might give us an indication that they're either taking that on board, or that we can actually make the representation to the Office of Local Government about it. It is difficult because even under our current code of meeting practice, the general manager can't call for an extraordinary meeting.
No.
It can only be done by councillors. And if there's no councillors, how do you call your first meeting?
It's a little bit tricky.
So one of the things that we might have to do is put some arrangements in place for the new council, even though they're not elected. So it may be that we have to nominate a date in January for the first council meeting of the incoming council, so that at least they have a date to work to.
Yeah. Can I suggest, I know there's an opportunity for questions as well, whether the question can be raised, have they checked whether any facilities are available for polling? Because there aren't any. They're all booked out. School, end of year functions. Anyway, just might be something that somebody raises. I'm probably sure we're not the only ones.
Madam Mayor, that was essentially what I was going to raise, was that this is the busiest time for our schools in terms of holding their end of year celebrations. Even parents aren't allowed on campuses right now. We can't go in and do home reading. We can't attend any of the ceremonies. And to hold an election process at these halls where students then have to turn around and do their presentations in, I just can't imagine that's going to fly at the flagpole, because it's going to put it in jeopardy for students being able to, like, just one COVID case through them is going to jeopardise their ability to do that, allow the schools to function. I'm wondering whether or not those attending the meeting are able to ask the question of how we proceed, and whether or not the term should actually go through to the February, and then and that being the first.
It's going to stay until 2023.
When you register for the webinar forum, you can actually ask a question up front. But the way the webinars work is there is a chat room, and you can actually ask a question during the presentation that they actually either respond to on the day, or they take on board and they provide that feedback after the meeting. So there is opportunities through the webinar to actually do that. So I've certainly registered already. I haven't asked a question, but I do know, having participated in some of these before, you can actually ask questions during the course of the event. It's only for an hour. Some of the webinars have been really, really good that I've seen come from the OLG, and others have been particularly ordinary. But it's a bit of hit and miss. But I think there's plenty of people interested in this one because of the logistics around running an election in December.
Okay, so we're just noting the report, and there'll be further reports as we have further information. Well, mover and seconder, who was Does
anyone want to go?
Well, you can just pass the email around and just register yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, registered. Easy.
We'll ring Chris afterwards. Okay, moving right along. Council committees, framework and transition arrangements. Councillors, we have a committee framework and transition arrangements. Paper's been put together for us. Looking for endorsement. Do I have a mover or a seconder on that one? Councillor Harker, thank you. Councillor Reid is the seconder. 9.2. Councillor Harker, did you want to speak to it first?
Oh, thank you. Just assuming this is a little similar, that all those transition arrangements will now need to be moved back because they've all got September dates on them.
Right.
So it can't be endorsed as it is.
Well, basically, the dates on the transition plan will effectively change because we have the ability now to run the committees for a few extra months. And in fact, that's something that we're going through all the committees at the moment to see they're coming up. I know that the Memorial Hall Committee want to meet as soon as a report's been produced. It's quite feasible that Aboriginal Consultative Committee, the Economic Development Committee may wish to hold a meeting before the revised election. So that can still take place. So we're just working through the logistics of doing that at the present time. In the meantime, this is basically means that this is a framework for the next council meeting. They still need to choose what committees that they want and how they want to recruit for that process. And the framework is providing for those community groups like the Wee Jasper Hall Association that want to enter into a memorandum of understanding to run the council facility, that we will continue those negotiations with them about setting that agreement up so that they can actually do that without reference to council.
So just as a suggestion, do you want to just say endorse subject to completion date needing to be varied or something along those lines?
Yes, please, because it can't do it as it currently stands.
Yeah.
The other question I was going to ask is could these group or these committee members actually be contacted, let them know that their term, once you go through potentially tomorrow's call with more information, that their term is actually being extended, so they know now the possibility that the chair or council will be contacting them to have another meeting, because we've all had a farewell tour and said goodbye.
We are in the process of doing that. We did send a letter out saying it was the 4th of September. We've now got to go back and say, oops, now it's the 4th of December. So
maybe.
Email?
So those letters have been done.
Email as well?
It's actually not email, actually the 4th, it's the 6th if you're technically going 4 weeks. Yeah. I'll leave that to you. Councillor Frost had a question?
Yes, question. To the gentleman. This is I attended the forum that we had on this, and I didn't have this question in, but when I looked at this mapping here, I'm asking, where are the advisory committees at? I'm trying to work out where the advisory committees fit in. For example, the Economic Development Committee. I'm just trying to work out where it fits amongst those, because we've got the community facilities, which is not one of those. Then it's single purposes project committee, which are a limited duration and just for a specific thing. Is it one of those that you're looking at, something like that Economic Development Committee or a health committee or whatever the council might decide to have?
The diagram is, I read it literally, the diagram is basically suggesting that those advisory committees would sit into that single purpose. They would have a particular brief and focus. They can be for a limited duration, like the Yass settlement strategy, where we had it for the purpose of producing the report and providing oversight to that report. And the Director of Planning and I have been talking about one for the Main Street project that's coming up in the next year along a similar line. But it also allows you to have like a standing committee that actually goes for the duration of the term of council. So there is that flexibility there. It's just that diagram, when it was produced by the internal auditor, that dot point wasn't put into that little box on the special purpose committee, and it should have been.
That's fine. As long as I say, I didn't have the whole version. I didn't have that problem. So thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, all those in favour? Oh, sorry, you had a question.
So I'll second it tonight. Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's right. And if it's already in here, just tell me to sit down politely. The special purpose committees, and maybe it's too soon to ask also, how are roles going to be filled for that? Is it going to be just an ad hoc through council, put a recommendation forward that the committee be established and then go out to the community as a general notice, or?
It's the intention is to run it similar to how we've done it in the past, where we call for expressions of interest from members of the community for the positions that are available, and then they're evaluated by councillors for those committees. And the intention, the outcome, if you like, from the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee was that those people should be largely people with experience, expertise and skills that they can bring to the table that perhaps are not that we don't have within the organisation. So the idea is to look at a skills-based committee. But at the end of the day, ultimately, it's a council choice on who actually gets appointed to those committees. In the past, we've tended to, most people have ended up being on the committee because we're not always overwhelmed with people for those standing committees, because it's a big commitment. 4 years for some of those committees is a big commitment. The feedback that we've had from some committee members is that they prefer the shorter duration project-based committees because they can do it for a few months, but they're not there for 4 years. So we're trying to give that flexibility for both options for members of the community, so that might hopefully trigger some interest.
Thank you. Okay. All those in favour? Thank you. Moving along to, you need to speak to someone. No, happy. Let's see. Hey? The girl behind the mask.
Yeah, behind the mask. Who was it?
Yass Sparks has just joined us to assist with our media and comms team. So that's the lady behind the mask.
Great to see you back here again.
Yeah, it's really good.
Okay, moving to notice of motions is nil. Questions with notice is also 0. Minutes and recommendations of council committees. So we have the Bango Wind Farm. Cecil, you
I'll see you.
heading?
No, I'll see you.
Okay.
I second the Bango Wind Farm. I think the councillor attending might want to move it. Bango Wind Farm.
Committee minutes and all.
Okay, so moved Councillor Frost. Thank you. Seconded Councillor Furry. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I just noticed when I was reading today, again, that there's a final note there that says something about me considering being a community member. I may or may not, I still haven't decided whether I would take up such an offer. But could I just make the point that there's no substitute for a councillor, and I would very much say please put a councillor on to that committee going forward.
Questions, Councillor Furry.
Sorry, can I just clarify the commentary from the mover? Two-part. First part, when would the intention be to make you a community member? Would it be before the end of the term? And secondly, just on the record, I'd be happy as I think I'm still the alternate for this consultative committee to be considered for that when the time came. If you say that the answer is prior to the term, for some reason they want to make you a community member, I don't see why they would. Am I making sense? Or
The situation was that I said I was leaving council, and therefore I was not going to be a council member after the term of the council. And they said, well, would you like to come on as a community member? This is my patch, or it was my patch when I was a young bloke. It was kangaroo and that sort of community. And so I got some links to that community. I would prefer somebody who still lived close to there if there was something they were asking for that. But I would say, and I know I'm surprised that it's in the minutes. It is in the minutes. And because it is, I would just like to make it clear that I would think a councillor on there is a very good thing to have.
No further questions. All those in favour? Thank you. Moving to the minutes of the Canberra Region Joint Organisation on the 11th of June 2021. So moved Councillor Furry, seconded Councillor Turner.
Discuss the question.
Yes, use.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's just something that Councillor Jones brought up the other day that I went back and reread the papers again. Just to clarify that the decision we're potentially making in the next item is part of, I see in the minutes, you've given the LGAs a 4-week window to make that decision. So we're actually making the decision in the next item. So yeah, which is the same as what all the other joint organisation members will be.
Yes. So this was just explaining that every council has its choice whether it joins this process or not, and each council is discussing that, which is actually to be taken up in the next item further. Yeah. discussion. So it's really just noting the recommendations that have come out of the Canberra Region Joint Organisations report. Councillor Jones.
Follow-on question from that. Are we the first to decide, or are there other councils that have already ticked the box?
My understanding is some councils have already ticked the box.
Yeah.
My understanding is Golden and Macquarie have. Upper Lachlan, I'm not sure when their meeting is, but I'm pretty sure
Intending to.
that they're intending to. That's the clear advice that I've received from them. Snowy Monero are definitely in. Urbadella are definitely out. They're the only ones at this stage that what I understand is that there are some councils. Hilltops Council is very keen, is very interested, but they haven't made a decision to my knowledge at this point in time.
Just want to make sure we're not going to be standing solo at the altar. So.
You just default back.
Well, if we're solo at the altar, then all we're going to be doing is running our own audit risk committee. That's the fact of it. You won't be going through the JO if there's only one person involved. Councillor McManus, did you have a question?
Yeah, just on those councils, on the general manager's comments.
Right.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Because Urbadella is big enough and ugly enough to do it on their own.
Yes, they are, and what their arrangement is at the moment, they've already actually contracted that out to a private provider, and they're locked into that contract. That's why they're not interested at this point in time.
So my understanding from the minutes that the advantages are for the smaller councils, town councils. So was that the debate was had at that meeting?
It's certainly at the JO.
At the JO.
At the joint organisation meeting. So Goulburn, I wouldn't consider one of our smaller councils. Therefore,
no, but Snowy, us, they're the ones that are going to get from those minutes. That would have been the discussion. But those smaller ones that would have been to get the most advantage.
yes.
Certainly, the Snowy Monero has been out to the marketplace about 3 times to try and recruit, and they have been completely unsuccessful in that process. That's why they have been looking at our shared service that we currently have with Goulburn and Upper Lachlan and said, can we come on board? The concern of the 3 participating councils was that we only had one person and it was going to stretch them and we would lose out in that process. So the suggestion was if the JO runs it, they can actually resource up depending on how many people come to the table with that shared service. So it may be that they end up with a small team of people.
Yeah, so probably now we're in the next bit, isn't it?
Let's go. I think go to the next bit where it's probably where we need to discuss the actual.
This one you're only simply noting.
Just noting the recommendations that have come out, and most of those recommendations generally come back to council for the next one. Yep. All those in favour? Thank you. That's everyone. So moving to the next one, which is minutes of the Audit Risk Improvement Committee on the 29th of June. And obviously the recommendation in relation to the audit suggestion and advice is really what, I guess, the main part of what we're discussing in this process at the moment. So do we have can I have a mover and seconder just for debate? Councillor Furey, Councillor Harker, thank you. Questions? We've got questions. I'll start with Councillor Frost, then I'll go into Councillor Jones, Councillor Harker and Councillor McManus.
You won't do that, I'll ask the question.
Councillor Frost.
The briefing as I do regarding this is all about the money. Now, for the risk committee, I suppose you expect it to be the first party of the money. What's not there is any consideration to mine of the level of service we get or the degree of accountability back to this council without going to a JO, which then runs an audit and risk committee. And I'm wondering what sort of, what are those links and how would they be done? I mean, I sometimes get concerned about the lack of our links to our own committee. This seems to be at least 1 or 2 stages further away. And how are those links and how do we know we're going to get good quality, and if we're not getting good quality, we're not happy with it, how would we remedy that under this situation?
For the start of that sort of question is to getting those links back. The new legislation requires that no councillor is allowed to sit on it for a start. Whether we think that's good, bad or indifferent, that's actually what's been legislated, so we have to go with it. So the way to get the expert advice, and we have an amazing audit and risk committee supporting council at the moment, but the person doing all the operational work and providing the advice and sharing the wins and sharing the knowledge with each of the councils, feeding back into the council, who was working for us, is no longer with us. So finding another replacement for this person is actually one of the biggest challenges that all the councils have, is to actually find a suitably qualified person to do internal audit and to do those programs across the 3 or 4 councils, and they will do the same programs. So where you have a win out of Upper Lachlan or Goulburn, so Goulburn doesn't have an audit and risk committee either, other than the working party that we've had. The legislation requires that we actually have to have an audit and risk committee, so we can either do it on our own, and it's not just about the cost, it will cost us more, obviously, to do it on our own. That is normal. The recommendation from the Audit and Risk Committee, we had robust conversations around this as to whether it was just about the money, whether it was about actually really delivering a proper service back to the councils that have chosen to go with it. And Alice and I obviously were on that committee, but there was very in-depth, sensible conversation from the independent members of that group as to how that would work and the benefits that would come back to council in the affirmative. Councillor Harker's going to have a chat in addition to this as well.
I guess my thing is longer term. Once it's in place, what happens?
I think to follow on what Madam Mayor said, I think in terms of context, it was heavily debated. Not everyone was in agreement from the independent side, and so there was a lot of discussion about it. So I suppose sitting on that committee, I didn't think it was about the money. The money is, yes, it is an added bonus, but I wouldn't make the decision around the money. It's just not enough involved. Not for the statutory requirement and not for the risk and accountability that these committees need to take for councillors and council staff. So I think there were, it's not working as it is. So the view was, let's try something different and try and make it work and try and help the guys actually recruit, the council staff recruit highly qualified individuals. So by opening it up to more councils, you can possibly offer a larger scale role to an individual, attract more experience, help, people that, there's no hydro, can't actually get someone is incredible, that's a booming area. But the other good part I really saw that was the governance. How often do we say, what are the other councils doing? Have you checked in with them? This actually gives us a larger governance structure to work from and some cohesiveness through the Canberra Regional Joint Organisation. So I agree with you, completely needs to be reviewed, and don't like the disconnect back to not having a councillor on it. I don't think that is a great decision, and I think we have to look at a way to making sure that connectivity is kept somehow. But I do think it's worth taking the opportunity to try this model, because the other one is not working for many councils, including ours, given our staff member has resigned.
Just to add to that, if I may, just in an answer to your question, is that there is specific deliverables back to each of the council. It's not like they just go off and do their own thing and don't report back to us. They have to report back to the staff to provide advice, provide back to the council's advice as to what they've done. They have a work program that gets agreed, and then they have to deliver on it. So it's not like we're just giving it to the JO to run. They're just going to be the coordinating body for the funding and to direct the team. But those reports come back to us. Those are agreed with council and with the staff as to working on areas of weakness that we have within our internal controls and trying to improve those.
Okay. If I may, let's just assume that we put all this in place and we are unhappy, whatever, I don't want to, but we're unhappy with the service or whatever about it. How do we actually convey that and get that changed in the long term? How do we,
You're a member of the organisation. You have a seat at the table.
The JO only, or is that the...
Basically, that was the concern of the Risk Committee, was that it's a very important one that council continues to get a service that's tailored to its needs, and that may be different to other councils. That we don't see a drop in service. That was a very important thing that the independent people on the Audit Risk Committee felt was important to emphasise. The thing is, if we enter into this arrangement and we are not happy with it, and we're not happy with the level of service we get, the process would be to bring that to the attention of the JO, to say we're not happy with it, lift your game, or we're out of here. And because it's an opt-in, opt-out type arrangement, that's why Eurobodalla says, well, we've got an arrangement, we're going to go alone at this stage. After the term of that contract, they may actually come on board if they see it working well. But we also might find out that if it's not working well, that we want to go in a different direction. So we have the option to put them on notice to say, well, we're withdrawing from the service.
So it would be quite feasible. I mean, it's unlikely that, you know, if we were the only council that was unhappy, then we'd have to go off and do our own thing.
Correct.
More likely is that there'll be two councils unhappy, and they can opt out at any time and say, okay, we'll go and do it. We'll form, say, what we've got at the moment, for example, 3 councils or 2 councils.
You can't do it with 2 councillors. Legislation does not allow for it.
2 councils.
Oh, 2 councils doing it, sorry.
2 councils could actually decide.
Councillors, apologies for the misinterpretation.
Decide to go and do something. In other words, ultimately, council can say, we don't want to do this anymore.
Yes.
We are
in charge of our own destiny in relation to this.
Yeah, that's exactly the arrangement we've got with Goulburn and Upper Lachlan at the present time, is that we've agreed to continue to participate, but at any stage, if we're dissatisfied with the service, we would opt out. That does leave a bit of a problem under the current arrangement that we have, is that we employ the person, or we did employ the person. So if we opted out, we'd have to make some arrangement with that particular person, either to go to another council to be on their payroll, if they were still happy with that person. But at the moment, we've got a vacancy in there, so it's probably less of an issue for us just at the minute in terms of negotiating with an individual if we opted out. But at this stage, the committee's been going as a joint service for probably the best part of 18 months. And I think at this stage, the feedback that we've had from the other participating councils is that they were very pleased with the service that was being offered through the person that we employed. And we certainly didn't have any qualms about the program, and we had input into the development of the program and the reports that were coming back through the internal auditor that we had engaged. But we now have a problem at the moment where we don't have an internal audit person. We have a meeting coming up in October, I believe, September, October, of the audit committee. It looks like probably Lynette and I are going to be the ones that are trying to provide the reports to that committee as a stopgap measure until the JO gets off the ground, if that's the way you go.
Further questions, councillors? Councillor McManus, Councillor Jones as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Councillor Harkin was saying. Is when I was reading through these, I didn't think it was all about the money at all. In fact, I thought we were getting fairly good guidance on that. But I did want to check in. So our current arrangement, is that the 79,000 that we contribute to the 3, the Goulburn, Upper Lachlan and us? Is that what we're currently doing in terms of the cost allocation of the shared function cost allocation, table 3.2, page 259?
How much does it cost us at the moment?
Yeah.
Currently costing us.
Where with 3?
It's roughly that. It's roughly about 80,000 is our share. It's based on population. That's why Goulburn pays a lot more.
Yeah. And if we went alone, it's more than double.
Well, if we went alone, it'd be basically that. It'd be basically the combination of the 3 councils.
Yeah, so 170k.
Yeah.
And if we're on with up to 9 or 10, it goes down to about 65.
Yeah.
So there's
there is a cost saving, but
It's not magnificent.
it's not huge. Yeah, it's not a huge difference. But what I'm seeing is that we're incredibly vulnerable in our current arrangement.
Yes.
Well, we currently have no auditor.
No, that's right. Yeah, so it puts us in a better position to go on board with more than the 3.
The big part of the problem with going alone is that you're competing for the scarce resources with every other of our neighbouring councils. By grouping with the JO or through the JO is that they can get on with whatever resources it needs to service all of the people participating. And it's a central location, so it's really going to be attractive to the role because it's in Canberra effectively, or just on the is that we're not dragging someone out of Canberra. We're very fortunate that we're able to drag somebody out of Canberra to work for the 3 councils, but it's more likely that we'll get a person who's based in Canberra working for the broader region than trying to go it alone and competing with our neighbours. So, you know, if all of us go to the market for an internal auditor at the same time, or around about the same time, you'll have the market picking us off to see which one they go with and who gets the best deal. Whereas this way, it helps negate some of that competition between us, while at the same time we all get a service. Money-wise, the more councils involved, the lower the cost of our contribution. But the Audit and Risk Committee has made it very clear that we want to maintain the level of our current service that we enjoy at the present time.
Councillor Dennis.
Thank you. Eurobodal has indicated they're out.
Yeah, because of the contract arrangement.
So what about Queanbeyan?
Queanbeyan are keeping their cards pretty close to their chest at the minute.
Okay, the reason I ask is because the arrangement we've had 3 councils with one of the big pluses of that auditor is the sharing of information. What they find here, they can go and find elsewhere.
That's right.
If this audit reports back to the JE, the letters.
JO.
Yeah, JO. What's to stop Eurobodal or Queanbeyan being a parasite on the other councils? Because the reports are going to be shared through the JO, and then they get free access to the information that's been discovered through the participating councils.
My thinking on that would be...
You've got to protect if you're going to spend the money, you've got to protect the knowledge you've gained.
I suggest the attitude of Eurobodal would be, we're better than you guys anyway, so we don't care.
Well, possibly, but that's why I threw Queanbeyan, because I want to know if they're going to be passengers, you don't want to get the free ride.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but
I don't think so.
I hear what you're saying, but generally there is a free exchange of information between councillors, whether we had a relationship with them or not.
But we paid for that information.
Not necessarily. You know, for instance, if I'm trying to develop a policy on restricted assets, one of the things that we do is that we go to our other councils. We have no relationship and ask them, what's your policy?
Because you're all in the boat together.
Well,
but in this one you're not. That's what.
But the JO is coordinating it, but it's coordinating, and the reports will be coming back to each of our individual councils, not just to everybody generally.
Well, if that's a concern, we could actually say
they all join.
Well,
on the principle of this, I like.
Yeah, but
I don't like the outcome.
My personal view is that I agree. It should be one in, all in.
Yes.
And that way, the cooperative relationship continues across the 10 member organisations. The way that the JO was set up originally, and it's still to this day, is that where they look at joint services, it's an opt-in, opt-out arrangement. So you make the choice about whether you participate or you don't participate. The Eurobodal, for instance, did not participate in the Community Strategic Plan project that all the other councils are involved in it, because their view was we're going to do it ourselves.
Yeah.
and we're big enough to do it, and we'll get ourselves into trouble with that.
The rest of us knew it was a waste of time. We'll have to go somewhere else.
Look, I'm happy to talk to the CEO at the JO to say that that councils that take up the service, that the reports go to those councils, not to the ones that are involved. If that's a way of protecting some of the interests, if you like.
It also encourages us to get on board.
Yeah. I'm happy to do that.
I don't want to be offensive, but I just...
The reason it's an opt-in, opt-out is because everybody wants to maintain the decision of their own council, and that's why it's here.
That's okay. Yeah. We'll make the decision. It's okay.
Yeah. They run on a different drum.
Yeah. I appreciate that. That's what I can see the rest of all go together.
Yeah. My understanding of members of the organisation like Wingecote and Eurobodalla want to be part of the JO, but they don't want to actually really participate in the JO. I mean, one of the things under the legislation is you've got to nominate which JO you're part of. They've been put in our region, they put their hand up, they attend the meetings, but usually when it comes to decisions like this, that they like to go their own way for whatever reason.
Councillor Turner.
Mayor, can I remind everyone that we are still live to air?
Yes, good point. Councillor Harker.
Just briefing on that. I wouldn't be concerned about that from this topic. You have to consider if they have employment relations that they can't change. There are decisions that the individual council, and then they opt in at a later date. And if it's successful, they may want to join in. But you can share all this information anyway. Like everyone can look at each other's minutes, the staff talk, the independent auditors talk. So I wouldn't be worried about the proprietary information. I actually think it would just benefit everyone as a whole.
Thank you. All right, does anyone else wish to speak for or against? We have a mover and seconder. Okay, all those in favour? Thank you, that's everyone. If we can move to the minutes of the Traffic Facilities Management Committee, 30th of June 21. Councillor Jones, so moved. Seconded, Councillor Frost, thank you. Anyone else wish to speak for or against it? I think it's self-explanatory. Councillor Turner.
Mayor, for me, just to make these things easier in the future, perhaps a month or date for these events might be opportune. There's no mention anywhere as to when they are or how they fit into the community calendar. So it's just an assumption that we know when the wine and vibe and the potty pedal and the inward band is going to happen as a matter that we should know. It would help if we actually told when they're going to be.
A good point.
Knowing the organiser of the potty pedal, it's been deferred once already. Maybe deferred again.
Approximately one day.
It's September.
They are available in the agenda on the hub, but I note that yes, that's not being picked up in the minutes, and it would be handy.
Okay, so all those in favour? Thank you. I will actually now close the meeting at 6:30. 6:40. Thank you all for attending, and thank you for the live streaming.